Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about why do we fear innovation. Welcome to Invincible Innovation Live Show. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Mazor, Kario, Innovation and Value Creation Expert, and I have a very special guest with me. Hi Bruno.
Hello Eddie.
Hey, Bruno Pešec, President of Pešec Global, helping business leaders innovate profitably. I said it well, I think. We're live on LinkedIn,
perfect.
YouTube. Yeah, good start. We're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you're so invited to join the discussion and ask questions, and we'd love to hear what you think. Now we can start. It seems that all companies need to innovate. What are the biggest obstacles to innovation?
So I was just thinking about that over the last few days. I mean, okay, not just over the last few days. I often think about it. And when we think, we always say, like, go to the root cause, try to figure out, what is the starting point of it, and then solve that so that we can later on solve all the effects that are coming out of it. And the thing is, especially when it comes to innovation, we can see some patterns, some issues repeating again and again and again, but I personally am not 100% convinced that there is always a single root cause when it comes to innovation specifically, because innovation is so personal. And if I was forced to say one thing that gets in the way, I would be a little bit tongue-in-cheek, and I would say it's the organizations that are the biggest roadblock to their innovation efforts. And
Correct.
Then what specific issues happen in the organization is usually, peculiar to the country, to the market, to the industry. But, we are usually the best starting point. What am I doing a bit wrong? How am I blocking myself from innovating? Am I preventing my people? Am I being unclear? What is happening?
Yeah. And what do you think, like, within organizations, the fact that they're bureaucratic, hierarchical, things are really hard to change, they fear doing things differently. What would be the first thing, if you come to a leader, what would be the first thing that you check?
For a leader, so that's again a good question. I hope we will discuss it a bit later. So for leaders, I always check for two things. And that is, okay, first, are you really clear around what are you trying to achieve? And I know this sounds so obvious, but you probably have experienced the same when you actually go and the leader does have a clear vision, but doesn't really communicate it. So when you ask his or her management team, like, okay, what is the actual thing? What is the actual strategy? They will all give you a different answer. It will all sound similar, but isn't really the same. And this alignment is critical. And then the second thing to check is, okay, are you actually letting your people do the thing that you want them to do? Because what I've seen, so I'm based in Norway, and Norway has great employment laws. Like here, the work-life balance is great. Like in Norway, it's really great. Work hours are respected, etc. But that doesn't mean that just because you told people you're free to innovate, that people really are free to innovate. So for example, it's common to say, okay, you can spend 20 to 30% of your work time on innovation project. But what it transforms to into reality is that people work full-time their job and then add 20 to 30% of time on top of that. And that's not really sustainable, and it doesn't move the innovation projects further as fast as it could, and sometimes not at all. And these two things are really easy to check. Like you can immediately check them in one conversation, and fixing them is also usually trivial, while it has a really big return on investment if you want to.
Yeah. And do you think, like, if somebody has a really great idea and he's investing these 20 times within his hours or after his hours, and he really grow it within the organization? That's kind of a question, because you cannot really grow anything by your own. You need more people, you need more resources, you need so much more than just a good idea and to work something on your own with. So do they have these structures, the processes, the way to do it? It's not enough just to tell them you can work on it. They need to collaborate. They need the resources and money sometimes. So it's like, it's not enough just to tell them, okay, you have time.
Completely agree. And it's I love your question, what you said, like, is it enough to move it forward? And here, so in my experience, I mostly work with the larger companies. That's why I say like corporate innovation. I just like to qualify what type of innovation. And what's really important, like, is this concept of breaking down. So I'm not talking about going all the way to hardcore project management by the book, etc. But kind of there are certain things that can be done early on, and there are certain things that need to be done later. So this, if you're forced to go 20% route, that can work in the very, very early stage. So when just 1 to 2 employees are checking out, does this idea make sense? It works for that. But if you figure out that it makes sense and it needs to be scaled and developed into something, it's not enough.
Yeah, you're so right. So we have Avikshit, right, saying thank you, and we're so happy that you're with us. So, how could leaders, executives overcome the fear of innovation?
So if we start, what do they fear? So my experience through conversation with different executives is the fears are humane. So usually high performers came to their position because they were able to reliably produce results. And what's inherent part of innovation is the uncertainty it brings. Now, these executives are usually good at fighting with uncertainty and ambiguity. But the thing is, with innovation, even with lean startup, design thinking, outcome-driven innovation, all the modern approaches to innovation, it's impossible to reduce uncertainty to zero. That just won't happen. So there is always uncertainty there, which means that at one moment you need to accept, okay, we have done everything we could to gather the evidence that we could have gathered. Now we need to decide, are we taking a jump or we're not taking a jump? And in a lot of cases, because innovation projects in large companies are usually high-profile projects, so their ego, and not just that, but their credibility is on the line. So of course they're a bit more careful. Like it's not just am I going to fail or not, and we're talking about fail fast, celebrate failure. But come on, when you go into organizations, only failure that's celebrated is the one that has a spectacular turnaround.
Yeah, right. So it was this way, but now we're making lots of money from a pivot of that, right? So,
Exactly. So it's very rarely that you will walk into an organization and hear, oh yeah, we screwed up pretty badly. We bankrupted one whole business unit and we fired 200 people.
Yeah.
That isn't celebrated. But that is, you asked me about what can they do about those fears, not the fears. So broadly, like 3 countermeasures. First one, always make sure that the innovation initiatives, projects that they're looking at, they should make sure that they do have some sort of pretty big upside, and the upside needs to match the size of the organization. So in one case, I was chatting with the global head of innovation for a global telco company, and I asked them, what's your biggest regret? And he said, well, we spent 2 years working on a project without checking it with the core business. And they developed a project that had around 50, 60 million annual recurring revenue, which is great for a startup or a small company, but didn't even register on their P&L because it's in billions. So it was, you had a good project for 2 years that's unfortunately not big enough to make a difference to their business. So the easy thing for every executive to check is, okay, this opportunity, just roughly calculating or assuming, could it even make a bling on our business? If yes, let's move on. And then the second, so what I said, there will always be uncertainty in innovation, and it's impossible to guarantee the final outcome. That's just impossible. But what you're in full control, what every executive should at least be in full control, is controlling the expense. What we discussed earlier, like manpower, what do you give them access to, the structures you provide, all of that can be under as tight or as loose control as you want to, and should be, because every investment should be ultimately tied to some sort of a learning goal before there can be any revenue generation for early stage innovation teams and etc. And the third one, connected to the previous, like how do we measure innovation? And that's, I really love that field, the whole field of innovation accounting, up and coming, and kind of the current best practice. The current best practice, I look at the 3 levels. So kind of measuring the strategy, innovation strategy, which is portfolio metrics, measuring the innovation management layer, which is basically the innovation funnel metrics, and then measuring the team level, which is speed of learning, how fast are they experimenting, how fast are they validating or invalidating, more correctly, assumptions, all of that measures before they come to actually conversion metrics, revenue metrics, and similar things.
Yeah. And
I'll stop
actually,
here.
I'm going to go into what you're saying about measuring innovation, because I know it's something really important, and most people, it's like what they really usually start with is like, we want to have revenues, but first we're going to have people learning. And it's like only two sides. One is like without any measurement related to money, and the other one is like only the culture, people learning from mistakes. It's like only one thing, which is really hard to say that that's what we're doing, because it's unmeasurable in many cases. And the revenues will come in a year, in two, in three. But actually, you need to measure all these three and have these KPIs in front of you all the time. So everyone needs to know if they're reaching these goals or not, right? It's not enough to say we had this workshop.
I completely agree. And as you were talking, I just had the visualization. I will need to draw it after our conversation. So I was just thinking, if we think about it as a line, so we need to have the measures from the idea blurb to the dollar. So you cannot just measure idea stage and the revenue stage, but you need to measure everything in between, and that will depend on from company to company. So how are ideas transformed into business models? How are they validated? So thank you for saying this. I need to draw it later after the call.
We'll draw it together. And like what you're saying is actually they don't have this in front of them. So they don't have this line. They either have this or that or none of it. In many cases, just telling people you should innovate, and then it's like passing it on to the employees, but they don't have these structures of like, this is the number of investment we're doing, like that's the small bets that we're doing on these projects, that's a portfolio, that's the aims and the goals of the company related to that portfolio. So how do they relate to each other? How do we measure each one of them? How do we make them better and grow? And then we'll see the money out of it. So some of them will not have the potential of billions, and therefore, as you said, it will not measure up to what you expect. But if they don't start with millions, they will surely not get to billions, right? I guess.
That's true.
Yeah, but the thing is, I think it's what's needed from these leaders is to think like VCs, and most of them are not VCs. They don't see themselves as a VC leader. They see themselves as a corporate, making the core much better. That's what we're doing. And VC is so trained in measuring these bets, in betting well, and seeing like we have like 15 startups or ideas or beginnings, and from there we will probably have only one, but this one needs to be measured up to our goals. So it's only one of them will do the billions, but we need to do everything needed in order to get there. Which is hard.
No, completely agree. And I guess we could spend hours just discussing that. So you mentioned VCs, venture capital, and especially, as I said, so like corporate innovation, one of the viable tactics is CVC, corporate venture capital. And it's interesting. So I think for corporate innovation, the VC mindset is maybe more valuable than necessarily the whole VC approach. So because if you have internal projects, you have much bigger leverage on them. You're also taking more risk than traditional VC, because VC usually applies pressure to, okay, we funded you, so we have a percentage of company. We will either have someone on the board, advisory board, management board, whatever, and we're going to apply pressure. But the company has the benefit and option of saying, we want to adopt a VC approach, smaller bets, we're going to tightly control it. But at the same time, they're the ones that are funding the teams, putting people in, paying their full salaries, and they're actually taking more risk than a traditional VC. So managers must be careful also in selecting different tactics. And what does it mean? Like everything you said before, the structures, the organizations, everything is connected and interrelated.
Yeah. You know, when you said that they are not really VCs because they're the only funder for this startup, I thought that what they really need to understand is how to measure these ideas at the beginning. So usually they know exactly, they groom sometimes from their organization itself or from the domain, or like they know very well to do this, but they need to know all the time what else is an opportunity, what else could be done. It's like seeing the current situation, the present and the future in the same time. And when you're seeing the future, you could even measure from all these ideas what is the right, like what's the right bets, which is kind of hard. And you said like there is no strict way of doing it. It could be everything. Like, and if we had a strict way, we would not need VCs, because we would know from the beginning who would be the unicorn there. So there is no way to do it without the uncertainty, without like really tackling things that you don't know. Because if we had this possibility, it would be much easier, right? So all the 7% of startups would not start, because they would not be a winner here. And only the 3% that really knows that they're going to win, only they could really stay, like do their things, right? But it doesn't work this way. Like, and I think that the fact that in innovation, there's the percentage of unsuccessful initiatives, projects, startups, so on, is so vast. Therefore, you could fail like really easily. You don't need to do anything. Like most, very majority are losing. So it's hard.
Yeah. And it's so I just want to pick up three things that you mentioned. So what was really interesting, what you were talking just in the beginning around the concept of opportunity cost. So the executives must always be aware, like picking one thing doesn't just mean investing in that. It also means not picking other things. And opportunity cost is basically looking at, if we would have picked up something that might have been a better result, how much have we lost? So that is important. And especially now, so I am seeing more companies trying this approach of portfolio approach, where they start much more teams and say, okay, we accept that they will fail fast. But the problem is, it's like taking spaghetti and throwing it at the wall and seeing what sticks. Even if you are taking that approach, they still need to provide frame for it. There still needs to be strategy. There still needs to be some sort of a boundary. So you're not saying, if you're a financial institution, you're not saying, let's start another McDonald's. We're not starting another fast food joint. We might be starting financial product for fast food joints. That's perfectly fine. But we aren't going to start a fast food joint. So even when innovation, we say it's about thinking about outside of the box, I often say, well, it's not. It's about defining the box. And then just do out in whatever you want. But if you don't define the box, you're just shooting in the dark. You're not really trying to do something.
You're not doing that. You're just trying. And do you think that most like CEOs and C-level managers, do they lack this ability to define the box differently, or they just don't have the structures and the way and maybe, like the methods in order to do so?
So my experience with working with C-level is that it's not a question of capability or intelligence or even incompetence to some level, but it's rather the biases that come with their position and success. So what I usually tell, and I learned that or read it from late David Casey, is competent employees can make even the shittiest of strategies work. So if your employees want to make something work, they will make it work, even if your description wasn't perfect, if your organization isn't perfect, if your structures aren't perfect. So what happens is that after a decade or 2 decades or more of success, the C-level or executive, they start to believe that it was their decisions, their expertise that led to all the success. They slowly start forgetting, because they're starting to get more and more disconnected unless they have a very, very strong peer relationship and are constantly inviting this type of feedback. They lose this connection. And that is where, for example, people like you and me, Eddie, come into role, because when we come as outsider experts, it's easy to see and point a finger. Listen, you need to do A, B, and C. You just told me that you need to do A, B, and C, but you're doing D, E, and F. Why? And we start the conversation from there. So it's usually what I like to say, holding a mirror and saying, what you told me isn't what's reflected in reality. So let's start the conversation. Why is that so?
Yeah, but it's really interesting that you defined it as like they're so sure of themselves because they had so many successes to the point that they were where they got to, that sometimes even like putting a question mark is hard for them. So it's like defining themselves within the organization first. Like, yeah, this is what we've done. We've been successful with that. And maybe it's not due to our talents, it's too hard work with people that we work with, or so many collaborations created that. But more than that, I could be more than what I describe myself to be right now. I could do things a bit different. I could take maybe more risk. I could learn new things that I don't know currently, and I could think more than this revenue, like this quarter revenue, the next quarter revenue. I can think even further that. So it's like redefining actually how do you see yourself as the leader within the organization. Do you agree on that one? Does it make sense?
It makes absolute sense. So once the conversation gets started, then it's definitely for every individual. So I like to say everybody in organization should have the right to innovate, but should not be forced to innovate, because there are often conversations to innovation that are echoing the conversations around quality. So quality should be everyone's job. Yes, everyone is responsible for quality, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is measured on quality, unfortunately. When it comes to innovation, some people are trying to say the same. Well, innovation is everybody's job. Yes, sure, but I would go in the direction that everybody should have the right to propose ideas and ask, can I work on this idea? But I wouldn't go to say to force everybody to do that. And tying that into our conversation around conservatives, executives, not conservatives.
Yeah, that was a Freudian thing.
So going to there are different type of people. Some
Right.
some do prefer a little bit of rigidity, and people will say, well, we need to break them, we need to show them creativity and frolicking and running in the field. I'm like, why? Let's play to people's strength. We can help them see differently, but I don't think that my job is to change you fundamentally as a person. What I always see as my job is to help you to become better executive, better specifically in innovation, because that's what you and I specialize in. So that is where I see it. But I don't try to force them to become something that maybe they don't want to be. And that comes from my fundamental belief. When I approach my clients and everything, I don't assume they're broken. Like some approaches assume that people are broken, that they're incompetent, that they don't understand what they need to do. No, I go it from, you're a successful person, you're a successful executive, the results are behind you. But now this might not be working as well as it was before, or you want to do something a little bit better. So let's start building on strengths. And there's a lot of also academic theory supporting similar approach. So kind of strength building has much better returns than kind of trying to avert weaknesses. So weakness is just avoid doing it, but don't try to transform it into a strength. But your strengths, try to exemplify them even more. So that is.
And
it felt a
same
bit
goes,
rambly.
yeah. And I think the same goes to your employees. So some of your employees are really built for innovation. So they're curious, they want to know more, they want to do more, and they want to try new things. And some of them are not. And that's just fine, because the ones who are not innovative are the ones who are doing exactly what's needed. They're very like built for processes. The current processes is supported by them, and they're doing their work really, really well, but they're not good innovators. You just need to find the right processes and people and structure, to take these talented, curious, innovative people and give them the framework to work. And you need to find them, of course. Is the same way you find this in yourself. You need to find the right people in your organization in order to make it work, which is sometimes challenging, but they need to do it. But they know their people, I guess. So maybe it's not that hard.
Well, that's probably what you said. Less is probably a big assumption.
They don't
Especially
know.
the bigger the organization, the less likely is that you really know what your people are able of doing. So for example, one financial institution that I work with, it's Norwegian companies, big Norwegian companies aren't big in a global sense. When you say like big company in Spain, it might be 100,000 employees, but big company in Norway is like around 20,000 employees. So much lesser scale. But also, we don't know that many people. So if I had Adi in my organization, unless there's some connection between you and me, either through an acquaintance within the company, or maybe we accidentally had a lunch, or you had a talk that I attended, it's unlikely that I will know that I have an innovation expert in my company. So what companies know is what's limited to their people. Companies are dead. Organizations are dead. It is what people in organizations know. And if people in organization don't know about each other's skill and competence, we cannot say that organization as a whole is competent in something. And that is a big challenge. And I usually see companies approach it one way, which I don't think works that well, or works well for just a specific case. And that is, they decide, okay, we want to innovate. There's a big change. A competitor is moving in. We need to respond. And then they go really aggressive. Let's hire an external HR agency. They will help us find internal talent. They will also help us find external talent. We are going to, use the whole HR process in order to set up an innovation team, and then give them 200 million or 20 million, whatever, and they need to counter this. But everything that you said before, I think, is a better approach, which I would summarize as companies need to continuously create space for innovation. And when I say space for innovation, I'm not just talking about physical space, which is usually the least important thing and the most visible thing, like Post-it notes, colored walls, nobody cares about it. But creating space in the sense of incentives, like, why should I innovate? Why should I break my back to create a new revenue stream for organization to get a tap on my back? So incentives can be anything from stock to bonuses or non-financial benefits. So everything is possible, but there needs to be an incentive structure. So that's one. But also support systems like access to HR, access to legal, access to IT, access to all these functions that exist within an organization but cannot be used by average Joe. Not even executives can freely use that. So a head of business unit, even though he or she wields a lot of power, can rarely just go to group IT or group procurement and say, well, this is what I'm gonna buy. They can just fire back, follow the process.
Yeah.
Right. You want to hire a startup, follow the process. We don't care. And the process is for big vendors.
Yeah. And like, it's more than that. It's like you want to get connected to our clients, talking to sales, talking to support, to customer care. Like, we want to hear what our clients need, to build the right things for them or to adjust the right things for them. And even that, in some cases, is really hard for people, just to get to the clients and to listen to that. And in many cases, it's either the finance part or the legal part, which is like, which are doing their job. I'm not complaining, but they're doing their job and trying to protect really firmly the revenues and the legal part of the company. And sometimes it's contradicting to doing things differently, to working differently and trying new things. And sometimes these people need to even persuade them really, really hard until they get the opportunity to do so.
And it's you mentioned specifically finance and legal, and here it's really important for corporate innovation. So my experiences with both of these departments, usually much bigger than departments. So finance people, the CFO office and the finance, they already have the vocabulary to understand innovation. We just need to help them reframe it and then invite them in. So for example, my experience with business controllers is they usually feel like policemen, police officers. So it's kind of, they feel they're brought in way too late, and then the only thing they can do is kill the project, because they start asking questions that they always ask. And of course, the projects cannot answer them because they're working on something that will produce revenue in 3 to 7 years, and the business case is going to be horrible. But if they're involved early enough and it's explained, hey, listen, traditional valuation won't really apply to this project. What we would really appreciate is if you could attempt like a simplified options type of valuation, if we could do that, if we could have a range instead of a specific point, if we could do range estimates. And they will say, yeah, I know. I mean, that's within my skill set. I understand the approach you're doing. Let's figure it out together. Bam. problem solved. Because CFO is, in my opinion, one of the most potent and underutilized ally of corporate innovation. They're usually seen as, the person coming in to kill and halt everything.
Yeah.
But that is, in my
Who will
experience,
say no?
they're too late. Yeah,
Yeah.
the no person. But that only happens because they're involved way too late. If they are
Yeah.
part of setting up your innovation system from the very beginning, and there's a handshake, an agreement on the type of valuation and the measures that they will be looking at, easy peasy. The same goes for legal. So there needs to be some sort of boundary. Experimentation, lean startup experimentation is all the rage, has been all the rage. I love it. I'm doing it a lot myself, but it's very different in a business setting of a large company. You always need to be extra careful. There is always, every experiment must be also looked at, what is the potential brand damage? What happens if a competitor finds out? What happens if a customer calls to the call center and says, what is this? And I've seen that happening. I've seen it. So one company was experimenting with a product or service, more correctly, that would make part of their value chain obsolete. So they launched an experiment. It was off-brand experiment, but even though it was off-brand, they used their own designers. And they use just different colors, but you can recognize design elements even if it's in different colors. And a phone rang in a call center. One person from the supply chain called, hey, what is this? Are you trying to, muscle us out of the market? What's happening here?
Wow.
And there was no confirmation because it was plausible deniability. It was impossible to connect these two things, but the experiment immediately pulled off. Kill switch needs to be there for every experiment. Things like that can happen. Mitigation, have kill switches, make sure to know legal boundaries. You don't need to have a lawyer on every innovation team, but every innovation team must give proper consideration for these issues.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting what you just mentioned, because the fact that the design was similar just made a match in the person who called, in his mind. And
Exactly.
and most people don't think about it that much. They say, oh, we have designers here, they could do it. And these designers mainly, like, they work on the same type of designs for years. If they're working in corporates, it's not like an agency doing so many different type of design, and they're not that versatile in many cases. These designers are like, they know exactly the brand guidelines, and they're, even if they're changing the colors, this is what they're doing. And nobody really noticed it, even like it's so like obvious, it's related. But the clients do see that, actually, it seems. So maybe you need to disguise yourself more than just hiding the logo. That's what we see here. So what is the most important element of innovation as you see it?
Well, if we boil it down to one element, human.
Human.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen by itself. It is the right people at the right time on the right thing. Otherwise, it's, even if you follow all the best processes, it might fizzle out. As we discussed half an hour ago, there is no guarantee of outcome. So I once worked on a product that we made. It was in its category the best product in the world. It was so good, no one believed us. So we had to take it on a tour across the world to demonstrate it to our clients. And it was ultimately a financial failure. So even though we did everything right, everything by the book, we failed on some other aspects, because innovation is also not just one person. It is a series of humans, a ecosystem, as it's popular to say today. And everything is interrelated, everything is interlinked, and you need to take care for everything. At the same time, there's a psychological and emotional burden when you really need to think so broadly, but you shouldn't weight yourself or be too much punishing on yourself if something falls apart somewhere in the whole system. Because to me, what I usually advise is, do the best work you can and sleep well. That's it. If you do the best work you can ethically, then you have nothing to worry, even if failure comes, because there's nothing to be ashamed of.
Right. So we're almost done with our time. So I'll ask Louis only like two things in the
Mm,
end. So, what's your number one tip for leaders who want to innovate?
mm, mm. Number one tip for leaders that want to innovate: remember that most of the cases, alignment is more important than being right.
Yeah, being right is something. So, people love they love the feeling of being right. They
Mm,
love like,
mm.
yeah, and you're wrong, which is like the other part of being right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I totally agree that what you said is like it's resonating with what we just mentioned, that sometimes they're so sure of themselves when they got to this level in the ladder and the corporate ladder. Sometimes they feel like, yeah, I'm the one.
Mm,
I'm this person. And I see that a bit changing the way that we define leadership, right? So in
mm,
the past it was very more hierarchical, like I know and you don't, I decide
mm,
and you don't, I have all the knowledge needed to do the decisions, and I don't need to consult and to collaborate that much. And I feel that in the last few years leadership is defined differently a bit, and good
mm,
leadership is not only being the CEO, being
mm.
the one who gets the most money. It's not enough. In some cases it does, but it's not enough. So I think it's really important just to think about being humble, which
Mm,
is like a characteristic not attached to. When we think about the CEO, we don't think about a humble person in many
mm,
cases, but this skill or characteristic is really needed, especially
mm,
when innovation is dealing with the unknown. So you don't know. So you
mm.
need to be humble and just look at it and say, yeah, I really don't know, but I could learn.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think that they even need to unlearn some of those things,
Mm.
which
Completely
is,
agree. And when you mention humbleness, every executive is going to get humbled at least once in their career. And it really helps if you're already a humble person, because then it won't hurt your ego so much, and it will also act as a safeguard for burnout. Because if you lack humbleness and you get smacked in the face from the market, which, as I said, will happen once in everybody's career, it'll be a lot more painful if you don't have any humbleness in your body at all.
yeah. And do you think it's related to culture, like the country culture, the company culture, or it's a personality?
I would say it is related to culture and upbringing of every individual. The company culture does help in a sense that it amplifies or diminishes, reduces the trait. So I would say, if you walk into a company and after 10 or 20 years, your personality traits are either going to be amplified or you will be holding back because this type of behavior is not rewarded in the organization. So, and as we discussed, it's a little bit different for executives, because the longer they are, the more disconnected they get from the rest of the organization. So then it will be mostly in the peer circle of the management team. And as you said, it used to be different. Our organizations inherited organizing, leading, and managing from military organizations. And it's funny because now you have business organizations that are similar to military of before 100 years, while modern militaries moved way beyond such organization.
Yeah,
So this command and
right.
control, very outdated.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree with that. And like in Israel, you have lots of everybody goes to the army; it's mandatory.
Mm,
So we have lots of people going from the army to building structures. But startups are so like different than
mm,
structures in general. They're unstructured, so it's like a bit like neutralizing the effect, I guess. So I want to thank you for your time. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. So the question is, where could people hear more about you and contact you?
mm. Well, first, it's been also a pleasure with conversation, all the discussions, everything. So it always feels great to speak with someone who has, I wouldn't just say similar thinking, but similar passion, because that is the most important. Then we can challenge each other and add to each other and learn from each other. Because
Right.
if you're just saying the same thing, it's no learning. It might be fun, but it's no learning. So thank you for
Right.
that, Heidi. And
Welcome.
for where people can find, so we discussed a lot about fears and failure and things like that. So I recently published 9 Big Don'ts of Corporate Innovation. Everybody can find it for free on my website, which is www.pesec.no. So it's my surname.no, like Norway. And if there are any speaker notes or something like that, I will also slap a link, and people can always reach out to you and you can point them in the
Sure.
right direction.
Sure. So I'll add the link. I'll just say that the ones who are listening, because we have a podcast too, it's Pešec, but it's Pešec when
Yes.
you say it. Like, but
Exactly.
this is how you write it. Okay, so I want to thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure, and I hope we'll talk again and meet again. And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining me. If you want to hear more about my work, go to invincibleinnovation.com and visit my website. I'll see you next week with another innovative, insightful talk. See ya.
Bye-bye.